They laughed when she entered, a girl in worn heels, secondhand fabric, and eyes that hadn't forgotten what it meant to be hungry. Not just for food, but for dignity. She wasn't supposed to be there, not in a ballroom full of diamonds and dynasty. She was just an assistant, just a nobody, until the richest man in the room crossed the floor, took her hand in front of the world, and said, "She's the one who saved me when I had nothing." But what she said next shocked everyone. At 6:03 a.m., the first flicker of neon light buzzed to life above the rusted signage that read, "Sunny Joe's Diner." Inside, the scent of burnt coffee, bleach, and fried grease clung to the air like a second skin. The chairs were still upside down on the tables, but Ava was already tying her faded apron behind her back, her fingers moving with the kind of muscle memory only years of repetition could forge. She had been working here since she was 17, now 23, and not much had changed. Not the broken air conditioning, not the customers who whistled instead of speaking, and certainly not the way people looked at her. Like wallpaper, barely noticeable, easily replaced. But Ava, she noticed everything, especially him. Jaden, the delivery guy from Corner Express, always came around the same time, mid-morning, helmet under his arm, curls flattened from sweat, uniform shirt damp at the collar. He never sat. Just stood near the counter, eyes scanning the menu like he had a choice, though he always ordered the cheapest thing, 2 scrambled eggs, no toast, tap water, and he always waited until the other customers were served, as if knowing he wasn't part of their world. Ava noticed how he never complained, how he once got shoved by a drunk customer and simply apologized, how his fingers trembled slightly every time he reached into his wallet, like he was counting not just bills, but shame. Most of the other waitresses ignored him. Some rolled their eyes. One even called him that stray pup. But Ava. She packed him an extra muffin when no one was looking. She added syrup to his pancakes without charging. Once, when she saw the hole in his sneaker and the blisters on his ankle, she slipped a pair of thick socks into his delivery bag. No note, no credit, just human decency. And Jaden. He looked at her like he knew. Not the muffin, not the socks. But the loneliness was behind her tired smile. Ava's apartment was a one-room box with a leaky ceiling and a mattress on the floor. Her wardrobe consisted of 3 uniforms and 2 dresses she hadn't worn in years. Her real life, the part that mattered, was her grandmother, whom she took care of every evening after her shift. Stroke had robbed the old woman of words, but not warmth. They would sit together, Ava feeding her soup, brushing her hair, whispering stories about a future she barely believed in. "One day, Grandma," she'd say softly, "we'll have a porch and sunflowers and a table that isn't a folding plastic." But dreams cost money, and money was something Ava didn't have. Not when the diner barely paid minimum wage, not when the medical bills piled higher than her hopes. Still, every morning she showed up, smiling through exhaustion, serving coffee to strangers who never learned her name. Until the day Jaden slipped on the curb in front of Sunny Joe's. It was raining, the kind of cold, stinging rain that soaked your bones in seconds. Jaden was rushing, cardboard boxes stacked high in his arms, eyes barely visible behind the fog of his glasses. Ava saw it unfold like a slow-motion film. His foot hitting the curb wrong, the skid, the crash, the muffled cry of pain. No one inside moved. A few even laughed. But Ava was already out the door, her apron flapping, knees on wet concrete as she knelt beside him. "Are you okay?" she asked, breathless. Jaden blinked, water dripping from his lashes. "I think my wrist." She didn't hesitate, took the boxes off him, helped him sit up, wrapped her own scarf around his bleeding palm. The rain soaked through her clothes, but she didn't care. She brought him inside, sat him in the staff booth near the kitchen, brewed him tea, and brought her own lunch from the back, rice and beans in a plastic container. "It's not much," she said. Jaden looked at her, his voice cracking. "It's more than I've had in 2 days." And in that moment, something shifted, not just between them, but in the fabric of fate itself. What Ava didn't see, as she bandaged his wrist with trembling hands, was the way Jaden looked at her. Not like a waitress, not like a charity, but like a mirror, like someone who saw him even when he had nothing to offer. It was the first time in years he had been touched without being judged. Outside, the rain continued, but inside that tiny diner, a storm far greater had just begun. A storm that would uproot everything Ava believed about class, kindness, and the man behind the delivery badge. The rain hadn't stopped when Ava helped Jaden into the storage room behind the kitchen, a place where broken fans, empty syrup boxes, and forgotten memories sat piled in corners. It was the only dry place she could find that her manager wouldn't notice for a while. She laid a towel across a crate and gestured for him to sit, then dug into the first aid kit hidden behind the stack of cleaning supplies. "It's probably sprained," she muttered, unwrapping the bandage like she'd done it 100 times before. She had, actually, on herself, on Grandma, even once on a stray cat she nursed back to health. Jaden winced as she gently wrapped his wrist. "You don't have to do this," he said. "No one else is," she replied without looking up. He chuckled softly, then fell silent. When she finally met his gaze, something passed between them. Not flirtation, not pity, recognition. Ava didn't ask about his life, and Jaden didn't offer, but the silence between them felt warmer than most conversations she had all week. When she handed him a steaming mug of cheap instant tea, he held it like it was champagne. "You're not like the others," he said quietly. "They don't even see me when I walk in." "Yeah, well," Ava shrugged. "They don't see me either. And I work here." He cracked a smile. "Then maybe we're both invisible." "Invisible people have to stick together," she said with a soft laugh. That day, Jaden didn't make any more deliveries. He stayed until the rain died down, leaning against the wall, sipping tea, occasionally glancing at Ava as she returned to the floor. He watched how she held her tray like a shield, how her smile was thin but stubborn, how she apologized even when customers were the rude ones. He watched the manager bark at her for taking too long in the back, not knowing she had just prevented a young man from blacking out on the sidewalk. She didn't defend herself, just nodded, swallowed, and returned to work. Jaden stood when she walked past again. "I'll head out," he whispered. "Thanks again for everything." She waved him off. "Take care of your wrist." He hesitated. "What's your name?" "Ava." "Ava," he repeated, like it was the first real word he'd said all day. "I'm Jaden." She smiled. "I know, it's on your name tag." And with that, he left. For the next few days, Jaden didn't come back. No orders, no deliveries. The usual Monday morning drop-off didn't happen. By Wednesday, Ava was chewing her lip by the window during breaks, pretending she wasn't looking for him. On Friday, she saw a different delivery guy, taller, louder, cockier. He didn't smile, didn't nod, just threw the package down and walked out. Something in her sank. Maybe Jaden had quit. Maybe he'd been fired. Maybe he was hurt worse than he let on. Or maybe, just maybe, people like Jaden didn't stay in a world where kindness was rare and unnoticed. Ava's days fell back into monotony, grease burns, sarcastic tips, co-workers who gossiped more than they worked. But inside, something had shifted. She missed talking to someone who didn't treat her like a walking refill machine. She missed his quiet gratitude, the way he listened without judgment. She missed being seen. And then, one evening as she locked up, she found something odd. On the sidewalk, just outside the door, was a small paper bag. No name, no note. Inside was a thermos of hot cocoa, real cocoa, not diner mix, and a soft knitted scarf, brand new, navy blue. At the bottom of the bag was a receipt from a store across town, paid in cash. Ava stared at it for a long time, her fingers tightening around the fabric. She didn't know why it moved her so much. Maybe because no one had given her anything in years. Maybe because someone remembered that she worked the late shift. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the first time she felt like the world had whispered back, "I see you too." She took the scarf home and wrapped it around her grandmother's neck first, just to see her smile. Then she wore it the next morning on her way to work, not caring what anyone thought. It was hers, and it mattered. She didn't know yet that the small kindness she had given to a delivery boy would ripple so far beyond the walls of the diner. She didn't know she'd already changed the trajectory of her life with a simple act of compassion. But the city was watching. And so was Jaden, from a distance. He wasn't gone. He had simply taken a step back to make room for something bigger, something she couldn't yet imagine. And while Ava wiped tables, reheated soup, and held her breath every time the bell above the door rang, a new story was quietly unfolding. One she wasn't just part of, but the very heart of. The diner was unusually crowded that Thursday morning, but Ava's eyes weren't on the customers. They flicked toward the door each time it creaked open, half expecting a familiar figure in a delivery uniform to step through. But Jaden didn't come. Again. Instead, she was left to navigate the chaos alone, and serving pancakes to a grumpy couple arguing over syrup, taking orders from a group of businessmen too busy on their phones to look up, and dodging remarks from her manager who, as always, spoke to her like she was a problem to be tolerated rather than a person to be appreciated. "Table 7 is still waiting," he barked. "Move faster, Ava. You're not here to daydream." She bit her tongue, forced a smile, and poured coffee she didn't even remember brewing. The world didn't wait for hearts. Especially not hers. Just before noon, a man in an expensive-looking coat took a seat near the window and scanned the room with the impatience of someone used to being served before he even asked. His cologne hit the air like a warning bell. Ava approached cautiously. "Good afternoon, sir. What can I get for you?" He didn't look up. "Your manager," he said. Ava blinked. "Excuse me." "I said, get me your manager. I have a complaint." She stiffened. "May I ask what the issue is?" He finally met her eyes. "The issue," he said coldly, "is that I ordered takeout from here 2 days ago, and the order was wrong. I want compensation. Or someone fired." Ava's chest tightened. "Sir, I wasn't here 2 days ago, but I'd be happy to—" "Are you the one who hands out food?" "Yes, but—" "Then you're responsible." She tried to explain, to calm him down, but her voice was no match for his. He raised it, loud enough for the whole diner to hear. "This is the kind of service you provide? This dump should be shut down." People turned to stare. Her coworkers snickered under their breath. The manager emerged from the back, wiping his hands on a towel. "What's the problem here?" the man demanded. "This girl gave me a messed up order, and now she's acting like I'm crazy." Ava opened her mouth, but her manager raised a hand. "Ava, go clear table 6. "But I didn't. I said go." Her throat closed. She nodded once and walked away, the sting of humiliation burning behind her eyes. Again. Unheard, unseen, unfair. Later that evening, she received her paycheck and froze. The numbers didn't make sense. They were lower. Significantly. She scanned the breakdown. Compensation, dedication, guest complaint. Her heart sank. She marched to the office. "This can't be right," she told her manager. He barely looked up. "You embarrassed a guest. We had to offer a refund. That comes out of your check." "But I didn't do anything wrong." He leaned back, shrugging. "Doesn't matter. Learn to pick your battles." "So I get punished for being polite?" "You get punished for being replaceable," he said flatly, turning back to his clipboard. She stood there for a full 5 seconds before backing out slowly, the check clutched in her hand like a broken promise. That night, Ava walked home in silence. The streets were quiet, the sky bruised with the kind of purple that promised more rain. When she reached the apartment, her grandmother was already asleep. She placed the check on the counter, face down, and sat on the floor, knees pulled to her chest. She didn't cry, not at first, but the tears came when she remembered Jaden's face. Kind, honest, grateful. He never treated her like a disposable name tag. And now he was gone too. She didn't know if he had meant to disappear or if life had simply swept him away like it did with everything else she dared to hold on to. All she knew was that kindness felt dangerous. It made her vulnerable. And yet, she still didn't regret it. Not the muffin, not the scarf, not the rain-soaked rescue. Because even if the world didn't care, even if the check was short and the insult long, she had chosen compassion. And somehow, that had to matter. The next morning, as she slipped the navy blue scarf around her neck and stepped into her grease-stained shoes, she made a decision. She would keep showing up, even if no one clapped, even if no one noticed, because someday someone might, and maybe, just maybe, she wouldn't have to stay invisible forever. 3 weeks passed, no sign of Jaden, not at the diner, not on his delivery route, not even a whisper of him in the alleys and storefronts he used to frequent. Ava tried to push the thoughts away, to focus on the now, on the cracked plates, the sullen customers, the bills. But the silence where Jaden used to be became louder than the noise she lived in. It wasn't just worry, it was something deeper, like she had watched a door close before realizing it led to something more than just a boy with kind eyes and worn-out sneakers. One gray afternoon, she walked past Corner Express, the delivery hub Jaden used to come from, and peered inside. A bored receptionist looked up and said, "You need something?" Ava hesitated. "I was just looking for someone. Jaden, he used to work here." The woman clicked her pen, unimpressed. "Jaden, you mean the quiet one? Curly hair? Yeah, he's gone. Quit. No forwarding address." "Did he say why?" "Didn't say anything. Just left his uniform on the counter and walked out." "Weird guy." Ava stood there, frozen, the wind tugging at her scarf. "Okay, thanks." She walked away with more questions than answers and an ache that refused to dull. Who disappears without a word after someone saves you? That night, as she stood by the apartment window, watching the distant lights flicker in rhythm with her thoughts, she remembered something. A napkin. One Jaden had scribbled something on the last time he ate at the diner. She had kept it, tucked into her wallet like a silly keepsake. She pulled it out now, unfolded the creased paper. 3 words in slightly crooked handwriting. "Thank you, Ava." Underneath was a phone number. Heart thudding, she dialed it. Ringing. 1 ring, 2, 3, then... "This number has been disconnected." No voicemail, no trail, just gone. The next few days blurred together. The rain returned, soaking through her already thin resolve. The manager gave her double shifts without extra pay. One customer asked if she was new. Another asked if she was mute. It was like she had reverted to being a shadow again. Until the day a man in a suit walked into the diner. Not a customer, not a health inspector, not anyone who looked like he belonged in that neighborhood. He asked for Ava by name. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped forward, confused. "Yes?" The man handed her an envelope. "This is for you." "From who?" "He said you'd understand." Before she could ask another question, he turned and left, disappearing into the street like a ghost. Ava opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a handwritten note, no signature. "You showed me kindness when no one else did. You reminded me who I am. I'm not gone. I'm just preparing something worthy of the girl who never asked for anything but gave everything." She read it twice, then again. Her fingers curled around the paper like it might vanish. Her breath caught. Jaden hadn't disappeared. He had chosen to retreat, to watch, to wait. For what, she didn't know. But it was nothing. And now she knew something she hadn't dared to hope. She mattered, enough for someone to remember, enough for someone to come back. What she didn't know yet was that Jaden wasn't just anyone, that the man she had fed scraps to, patched up in a storm, and smiled at across grease-streaked tables, wasn't poor, it wasn't broken. He had simply been hiding, not from the world, but from himself. It started with a phone call Ava didn't expect. Not a scam, not a telemarketer, but a woman's voice. Firm, professional, and oddly warm. "Miss Ava Carter, I'm calling from Roselane Industries. You've been shortlisted for an executive assistant position." Ava blinked at the cracked ceiling of her apartment, thinking it was a mistake. "I didn't apply for anything," she said. The voice continued undeterred. "Your name was recommended internally. We'd like to invite you in for an interview. Are you available tomorrow morning at 10? Ava hesitated. She should have said no. It felt too strange, too sudden, like someone had typed her name into the wrong list. But something in her gut whispered, "Go." So she said yes. The next morning, Ava wore her best blouse, wrinkled but clean, and borrowed shoes from her neighbor. She stepped into a glass tower that seemed to scrape the sky, its lobby filled with marble, chandeliers, and people who looked like they hadn't eaten leftover diner food in a decade. A receptionist guided her upstairs. No one asked about her resume. No one questioned the tear in her sleeve. In the interview room, a tall man in a navy suit greeted her. "Miss Carter," he said, shaking her hand. "We've heard a lot about you." "From who?" she asked, genuinely confused. He smiled. "A former consultant of ours. He spoke very highly of your kindness, your resilience, and your work ethic. Those qualities mean more to us than degrees." The rest of the interview was a blur. Questions about organization, time management, and people skills. Ava answered truthfully, nervously. At the end, the man nodded. "We'll be in touch soon." She left the building feeling like she had wandered through a dream she didn't belong in. 2 days later, an offer letter arrived at her doorstep. Real letterhead, real contract, real salary, more than she'd ever seen in her life. Ava stared at the numbers, then at the fine print. The company wasn't just big, it was one of the city's most powerful private holdings. Jaden had mentioned nothing of this. Or had he? He hadn't said who he was, but now pieces were sliding into place. What delivery boy had connections to executives? What stranger disappeared and left behind notes that sounded like promises? On her first day, Ava walked into Rose Lane Industries not as a waitress, but as a staff member. Her ID badge hung heavy around her neck. People greeted her. No one looked at her apron. No one asked for coffee. But it wasn't easy. The work was demanding. The hours are long. The meetings are intense. Yet, Ava felt alive, useful, important. For once, her actions affected things beyond Table 7. She handled schedules, managed calls, and coordinated logistics for a team of executives who slowly began to respect her for her precision and calm under pressure. Then, one evening after hours, she was organizing files in the executive archive when she stumbled upon a personnel folder. Jaden Wolfe. She froze. It wasn't delivery logs. It was CEO's records. Founder level. The attached bio didn't mention delivery routes or courier bags. It mentioned venture capital, silent acquisitions, and philanthropy disguised as anonymity. Ava's hands trembled. Jaden wasn't just a delivery boy. He was the billionaire owner of the very company that had hired her. He had lied, not to manipulate, but to observe, to escape, to hide in plain sight. And she had seen him, not his title, not his wallet, but his humanity. Her knees buckled slightly as she sank into the chair beside the filing cabinet. He had tested the world and found only her worthy of the truth. He had vanished from the diner only to pull her into a higher world. Not because she begged for it, but because she never asked. And yet, he still hadn't shown his face. Not since that rainy day outside the diner. Not since the thermos, the scarf, the note. He had changed her life without standing beside her to watch it unfold. What Ava didn't know was that he was waiting, watching, wondering, whether she would rise into the life she deserved or shrink back into the shadows of the diner she'd once escaped. It was a charity gala, Rose Lane's largest annual event. Invitations were gold-trimmed, reserved for shareholders, dignitaries, and those whose presence raised stock prices. Ava wasn't invited. Assistants never were. She planned to spend the evening sorting files, clearing inboxes, maybe sneaking a sandwich from the executive kitchen while everyone else drank champagne. But that afternoon, a woman from HR showed up at her desk with a box. "This came for you," she said. Inside was a midnight blue gown, hand-stitched, modest yet elegant, with a card resting on top. "Wear it tonight. Your name is on the list." No signature, no explanation, just expectation. Ava sat motionless for a full minute before she dared to touch the fabric. It was softer than anything she owned. She could have said no, but she didn't. Hours later, the grand ballroom shimmered with chandeliers and the hum of wealth. Ava stepped in quietly, her heart pounding, unsure if she belonged, unsure if this was some elaborate joke. No one laughed, no one stared. People nodded politely as she passed. She found a corner and stayed there, sipping sparkling water, scanning the crowd for a familiar face. Any face. But Jaden was nowhere to be seen. Music played, speeches began. A screen lit up, showcasing Rose Lane's recent projects. And then, halfway through a highlight reel, she saw him. Jaden, in a suit, standing beside a foreign diplomat, laughing with a senator. He was introduced as Mr. Wolfe, our founder and benefactor. Cameras flashed, people clapped. Ava's heart clenched. He hadn't just disappeared. He had returned to his throne and left her in the shadows. She moved toward the exit, suddenly needing air, needing space, needing distance from the truth she hadn't fully accepted. But then, as she reached the ballroom doors, a voice echoed through the speakers. "Before we end the evening," the host said, "our founder has a personal announcement." The crowd hushed. Jaden took the stage, calm, composed, eyes scanning the room like he was searching for something, or someone. "Most of you know me by name," he began. "But a few weeks ago, I wasn't wearing this suit. I wasn't shaking hands with senators. I was delivering packages to back doors and alleys. I wasn't running a corporation. I was trying to remember why I built one in the first place. Whispers filled the room. He continued. And in that silence, in that hiding, I met someone who reminded me. Not through power, not through money, through kindness. The spotlight shifted. People turned. Jaden's eyes locked on Ava. She didn't know who I was. She didn't ask. She just helped, fed me, bandaged me, gave when she had nothing to spare. Tonight, I want to thank her, and I want the world to see the kind of woman who still makes humanity worth believing in. He stepped down from the podium and walked straight to her. The crowd parted like silk. Cameras followed. Ava froze, breath caught in her throat. "You were never invisible to me," Jaden said softly, reaching for her hand. "And you'll never be again." Gasps rippled through the ballroom, not because of the scandal, but because they realized the girl in the gown, the assistant in the shadows, was the heart of the man they thought they knew. And just like that, the third twist shattered everything. She hadn't just saved a stranger, she had rescued a king from his own golden cage. The ballroom was silent, suspended in a moment that felt more like a dream than real life. Ava stood still as Jaden held her hand, the warmth of his palm contradicting the cold flood of thoughts in her head. People were watching, powerful people, the kind who rarely remembered waitresses or assistants or girls who gave away their lunch to strangers in the rain. "Come with me," Jaden said gently, his voice barely above a whisper. "Let me show you what your kindness built inside me." Ava looked at him, really looked. He wasn't wearing a disguise now. No delivery bag, no bandages, no boyish grin, just clarity, confidence. The weight of a man who had everything and still longed for something real. "Jaden," she started, but the words caught in her throat. He stepped closer. "Say yes, to a life you deserve, to me." She opened her mouth but closed it again. Her heart was racing, but not with excitement, with fear. She looked around, the chandeliers, the crystal glasses, the $1,000 gowns. This wasn't her world. She had been laughed at by managers, underpaid, overlooked, and invisible. And now the brightest spotlight in the city had found her. And she was drowning in it. Slowly she pulled her hand away. "I can't," she whispered. The air left the room. Jaden blinked. "What do you mean?" "I can't say yes, not like this." Her voice trembled, but her spine stayed straight. "I don't want to be the girl plucked from poverty by a man in a suit. I want to be the woman who builds something, who walks beside someone, not behind them. I need to stand first before I stand next to you." Silence. Utter, complete silence. Then Jaden exhaled, and instead of anger, there was awe in his eyes. "You're even stronger than I thought," he said. "That's exactly why I chose you." He didn't try to persuade her. He didn't beg. Instead, he did something no one expected. He turned back to the crowd, took the mic, and said, "Tonight, I asked a woman I admire to walk with me. She said not yet, and I respect that more than I can say, because strength isn't about saying yes. It's about knowing when to wait." There was a murmur of applause, quiet at first, then growing. Not out of politeness, but out of genuine admiration. For him. For her. For the truth that had just unfolded in front of them like a modern-day fairy tale, rewritten with dignity. Later that night, as Ava stood alone on the rooftop terrace overlooking the city lights, she felt a strange kind of peace settle over her. She hadn't accepted the glass slipper, but she had rewritten the story, on her terms. What she didn't know was that Jaden had already left instructions that would change everything in the weeks to come, not because he wanted to win her, but because he wanted to honor her. A scholarship would appear in her inbox, an anonymous investment in a diner that needed saving, and a letter, handwritten, that simply read, "You may not be ready for forever, but forever will be here when you are." Ava didn't return to the diner, not because she was ashamed, but because something inside her had shifted. That rooftop moment, standing under stars brighter than her doubts, ignited a flame she didn't know she carried. She enrolled in a business course at the local college, using funds she found mysteriously deposited in her name. When she inquired, the office clerk simply said, "A scholarship was set up for you, no sender listed." She smiled and didn't ask further. She knew. Days became weeks. Ava worked odd jobs while studying, never asking for help, never leaning on anything but the certainty that she could and would build a future that felt like her own. She volunteered at food shelters, remembering what it was like to be the girl who gave even when she had nothing. She made friends, real ones, people who didn't care about last names or designer shoes. And every now and then, in the quiet of night, she'd reread that letter. Forever will be here when you are. Jaden didn't call. He didn't show up uninvited. But his absence wasn't cruel. It was reverent, like he was giving her the space to grow. She saw his name in headlines. Philanthropic deals, mergers, silent partnerships. But he never paraded his power. Instead, little signs would appear. A book she once mentioned at a used store now resting in her mailbox. A thank you note from the local shelter, funded under the name J. Wolf Foundation. He was watching, yes, but not controlling, not saving, simply honoring her path from a distance. Then, one evening after a presentation at school, Ava stepped into the campus cafe. She ordered her usual and turned around, only to find him sitting at a corner table, alone, holding 2 cups. One was already marked with her name. Her breath caught, their eyes met, and time folded into itself. She walked toward him slowly, cautiously. "How long have you been sitting there?" she asked. "Long enough to see you're ready," he replied. She sat. He didn't touch her hand this time. He waited. She reached first. "I didn't come here to be rescued," she said. "And I didn't wait to play the hero," he replied. "I just wanted you to see the crown you already had." She smiled, that deep, unshakable smile that only comes from weathering your own storms. "So what now?" she asked. Jaden leaned back. "Now, we build something new, together, equal steps, equal say." She nodded. No fireworks, no sweeping orchestra. Just 2 people, stronger now, finding their way back, not because they needed each other, but because they finally chose each other. 6 months later, the world met Ava Wolf for the first time. Not as a headline, not as a scandal, not as someone caught in the glare of a billionaire's shadow, but as herself. The launch of a new nonprofit initiative under Rose Lane Industries had drawn hundreds of reporters, influencers, and leaders. But it wasn't Jaden who took the stage that morning. It was her. Dressed simply, speaking clearly, Ava told the story not of wealth, but of dignity, of how someone forgotten by the system still found the strength to believe in kindness. "I didn't grow up expecting a handout," she said into the microphone, voice unwavering. "I didn't want to be saved. I wanted a chance to stand. And what I learned is that true strength doesn't come from who notices you when you shine, but who sees you when you're invisible." The room was silent, not out of boredom, but out of reverence. Jaden stood off to the side, hands in his pockets, pride in his eyes, letting her take the space she'd earned. The cameras captured her face, her words, and her composure. But what they didn't capture, what only a few people could see, was the girl who once scraped tips from diner counters and kept a bandaged boy warm in the back alley. That girl had not disappeared. She had evolved. That evening, as the footage of her speech circulated online, Ava became a symbol, not of luck, but of integrity. And that was the twist none of them expected. The world thought she was a hidden heiress, a Cinderella. But the truth was far braver. She had refused the ball, rewritten the rules, and built her own crown. She had stepped into a world that didn't see her, and made it look again, not with pity, but with respect. She returned home that night exhausted but fulfilled. Jaden was waiting by the door, tie loose, sleeves rolled up, the same boy in his eyes, no matter how many zeros sat in his bank account. "You were extraordinary," he whispered. Ava leaned against him, her head resting on his chest. "You made room for me to be. You kicked the door down yourself," he said. "I just made sure the lights were still on when you walked through." She laughed, that quiet kind of laugh that only comes when the battle is over and the soul is finally at peace. The sun was barely rising when Ava stood barefoot on the balcony of their quiet estate, her coffee warm in hand, the soft breeze brushing her cheek like a memory. It had been a year since the gala, since the rooftop, since the day she had chosen not to say yes too quickly, and every moment since has been built on intention, on choice, nota, fairy tale. Jaden stepped behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, his presence still as grounding as it had been that night in the alley. "You're thinking again?" he said into her hair. She smiled. "I'm always thinking." This time about what? About how fast everything changed, she said. How I almost walked away from it all because I thought I wasn't enough. And now, I know I always was. He turned her gently to face him, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. You were never the one who had to prove anything. The world just needed to catch up. Later that afternoon, they drove. Not to a gala, not to a board meeting, but to a small building tucked behind a park in a quiet neighborhood. On the glass door hung a hand-painted sign, The Wolf Center, where forgotten stories begin again. It was Ava's dream, now real. An outreach space for waitresses, cashiers, delivery drivers, and anyone who had ever been looked through instead of looked at. Jaden had helped fund it, but the vision, the soul, it was all hers. As they walked through the hallways, past walls lined with framed portraits of the people who inspired her most, Ava stopped in front of the last one, a photo of her. Aged 17, in a faded uniform, holding a tray, smiling despite it all. Below it, a small plaque read, "The girl who gave everything without expecting anything." That evening, surrounded by people who once lived in shadows and now stood in light, Jaden raised a glass. "To Ava," he said, eyes never leaving hers. "The woman who taught me that love isn't loud, but steadfast. That courage doesn't always roar, and that the truest kind of forever is built, not given." She didn't cry. Not this time, because this was her moment. Not of becoming, but of being. She stood, took his hand, and said only one thing. "This is the forever I choose." And as applause filled the room, it wasn't for a billionaire's wife. It was for the girl who once warmed soup in a diner kitchen, who once patched a stranger's wound, who once said no to the world's version of a happy ending so she could write her own. They expected her to say yes, to melt into the role of a billionaire's bride. But she stepped back, looked him in the eyes, and said no. Not out of pride, not out of fear, but because she wanted more than a fairy tale. She wanted truth, and she built it, step by step. When the world finally knelt at her feet, she didn't gloat. She lifted others beside her. That's when they realized the crown was never his to give. It had always been hers. So next time you see someone with dirt on their shoes and fire in their spirit, look closer. They might be the real story the world's been waiting to hear.